and we have declared war on tyranny and aggression. If this little nation goes down the drain and can't maintain her independence, ask yourself what's going to happen to all the other little nations.
The Vietnam War was not only the first televised war, but also the first to be uncensored. Reporters brought the tragedy of war into the American home. This newfound independent mode of communication in history divided the country on the political front. In 1887, France would assert its dominance over much of Southeast Asia, including Vietnam, deeming it French Indochina. In September of 1940, Japanese troops would invade Vietnam while being met with little to no French opposition, and would proceed to conquer the French in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, declaring each of them independent. Ho Chi Minh, a Vietnamese revolutionary and politician, would seize this opportunity to take control of the city of Hanoi, declaring it to be the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. France would then back Emperor Bao Dai in hopes of regaining control of Vietnam, and in 1949, the non-communist Southern Vietnam state was founded, with Saigon as its capital.
Active fighting forces by raising the monthly draft call from 17,000 to 35,000.
Of the many reasons for the United States' involvement in Vietnam, the main one was President Eisenhower's domino theory. Eisenhower reasoned that if one Southeast Asian nation fell to communism, that the whole of the region would follow as well. This imminent threat of a communist takeover fueled the growing concern and interest in Vietnam.
As the tide of tyranny surges southward, and the people, young and old, make ready to greet the victorious Red Armies.
The decolonization of many Southeast Asian countries would also be a huge determining factor in America's involvement, as China, the Soviet Union, and the United States all looked to these newly freed and independent nations as possible allies. The decision of whether a Southeast Asian country would be communist or not was critical in deciding this.
But peace under communism is not for these Vietnamese.
The drastic change in public perception of Vietnam can be traced back to the broadcast and news stories on the events in Vietnam, with the number of reporters in Indochina growing from less than a dozen to over 500 by 1968. Journalists in Vietnam risked their lives to report on the events happening in the war, with around 60 reporters being killed. While some journalists ventured into the battlefield to obtain first-hand stories of the conflict, the majority would remain in Saigon.
That the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
Innovations in technology would allow for important stories to be broadcasted directly to the U.S. via a Japanese satellite. As for other stories, their film would be flown to Japan to be developed and edited, and then flown to the U.S. to be broadcasted. Most of the stories involved brief reports and wire service dispatches that were read by anchormen. However, they would broadcast the war in greater detail and depth than any other previous war. Walter Cronkite, otherwise known as the most trusted man in America, would state of the conflict as being mired in stalemate. Cronkite's opinion on the conflict shifted the view of the news toward a more pessimistic and negative viewing of the war efforts.
We're losing 200 a day, maybe more. And these punks here against the United States Army, United States government, that's what you call anarchy and treason going against the United States government.
The reporter's job is to report what he says.
Bob Jones is a journalist who has traveled around the world reporting on many different significant events, one of them being the Vietnam War. Bob Jones has been dedicating his life to fair and honest reporting.
The average person wouldn't know that. How would anybody out there, they know very little about what's going on in the community, other than what they read or see on TV. They know their neighborhood, but that's about it. So the reporting is very important so that people, if they believe us, they put that wonderful thing in a free press. Somebody realized it's better to have that than to have nothing. World War II, everything was censored. So before your copy went anywhere, it had to go to a military censor, supposedly to make sure you didn't give away any secrets or whatever. Now, when Vietnam came along, they decided to make it uncensored. We had some rules, but as for what you said, wrote about, or whatever, nothing. You sent your stuff straight back home. And I think they learned to regret that real quick, because reporters began to see the truth, which was we weren't making much progress.
2 Americans were listed as dead. One was a machine gunner, and the second his company commander, who took over the machine gun from his fallen comrade and was killed himself. 13 GIs were wounded.
America's government believed and promised that the Vietnam War would be won within 6 months. However, as reporters continued to cover events on the Vietnam War, Americans started to see the government's lies. Through journalists and reporters, most came to realize that this war was against their morals. Vietnamese dependents lacked a clear plan or objective. This only angered and motivated the public to do something. Initially, protests began on university campuses where students rallied together to spread the message, the Vietnam War is wrong. The U.S. had already reached 15,059 casualties and 109,527 wounded by November 1967, costing the government around $25 billion per year. This led to more protesting, where the anti-war movement gained its power and voice. This was proven on October 21, 1967 at the Lincoln Memorial, as over 300,000 civilians gathered to protest the second draft. However, after dark, things got tense and violent. Around 30,000 participants circled around the Pentagon, still protesting the war, and later, hundreds of them were arrested.
Drove to the Lincoln Memorial. I have never seen the Secret Service quite so petrified with apprehension.
Americans turned on their own people. Maybe that's one of the worst things about that war, other than that we shouldn't have been in it in the first place.
To turn people against themselves is something that isn't done overnight. And while the tragic events in Vietnam shed a light on the fragility of human nature, communication is something one can't live without.
I wouldn't want to be in a country where they don't allow it.
From headline broadcasts to underground newspapers, newfound ways of communication gave way for a newfangled way to spread information. Reporters captured the conflict in Vietnam and conveyed the bleak scenes of war to the American public, making the Vietnam War the first televised war. The lives lost, scenes of conflict, and realistic status of the United States in the war resonated within the hearts of many Americans, causing protests, sit-ins, and violence, therefore demonstrating just how impactful media is. Newfound ways of communication could rally thousands of people together, or could tear a nation apart.